All right. Okay, welcome everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Our first meeting of 2021. Happy and healthy new year to everyone. I think we do need to do a roll call. So Kathy, do you want to, should someone take the lead on that, or do you want me to?
No, I'd be happy to, Rena.
Thank you.
Okay, Lauren?
I had to take myself off mute. Here.
Okay, Rena?
Yes, I'm here.
Cassandra?
Here.
Faye Ruth?
Here.
And Dimitri?
Here.
That's it.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kathy. Okay, so you guys should have received an email earlier. It was either last night or earlier today with a bunch of materials and an agenda. So first we will just do a quick review of the minutes, I guess, and ask if anyone has any questions or comments or edits to the minutes from our last meeting. Okay. With none there, do we need to take a vote to approve them, or can we just approve them?
I'm looking at the minutes, and I think last time we approved by roll call the minutes from February, if that's helpful.
Okay.
Yes, and
Let's-
Kathy, could you ask Andrew if he could join the meeting?
Will do.
Okay,
Okay. All right, so we'll take roll call for the approval of the minutes. Dimitri?
Yay.
Faye Ruth?
I wasn't at the last meeting.
Okay. Cassandra?
Aye.
Rena?
Yes.
Lauren?
I'm sorry, I'm just pulling them up because I'm not sure if, I don't know if we had a representative. Hold on one second.
It looks like you were here, Lauren.
I was there. Okay. All right. I trust that I was there. Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. So with that approved, we have a very packed agenda and a very short amount of time. So I'm going to hand it off to Carrie and her team to get us started.
Thank you, Rena, and good afternoon, everyone. We're on agenda item number 2, which is the fiscal year 21 and 22 update. So I am going to share my screen, and hopefully you guys can see. Let me know when you, yep. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. So as you very well know, the primary purpose of this meeting is to review with the subcommittee our current projections for fiscal year 21, as well as to present to you our fiscal year 22 budget recommendation that was submitted to A&F for inclusion in the governor's budget, which will be released later this. So I will start with an overview of the programmatic budget and then go on to the administrative budget. So from a programmatic perspective for fiscal year 21, our expenses are projected to be about 191 million, which is about 45 million less than what was last communicated with this subcommittee on June 2nd. This is a pretty big variance, so just give me a minute to explain at a high level, and then Edith can follow up with details on subsequent slides. So the $45 million variance, most of that is attributable to lower membership as a result of the extension of the public health emergency. But there is a portion of that variance that is attributable to CSR reconciliation amounts that were recently finalized for plan year 2019. So a couple of things can significantly impact CSR reconciliation. The first being the plan design. So the Health Connector for plan year 2019 implemented changes to the plan design that required carriers to use a silver plan with an actuarial value, or AV, of 72% for connector care. Prior to 2019, they typically used a plan that was on average that had an AV of about 68%. So an increase of your an AV to 72 means that the average costs that are covered by the carrier is higher. And then what we see is lower CSR costs. So Edith can speak to this in more details later, but those are the two primary reasons for the $45 million variance, which is plan design and timing. And then with respect to the timing, and we can talk about this later as well, there is essentially about a 2-year delay between when the advance payments are set and when final payments are reconciled. So again, these are the two issues that contribute to the $45 million.
And Carrie, just to interrupt you for 1 minute. This is something that you guys warned us was coming. Warned is probably not that, gave us a foreshadow of this when you were redoing the budget. So it's just kind of coming to fruition at this point, right?
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much, Rena, for that comment and the reminder. There are some slides in the appendix that speak to this in more detail, but essentially in June, again, to Rita's point, we knew that this was happening. At the time, we had expected that the carriers would owe the state $5 million, but now that number is actually $29 million. So that's the difference. Thank you, Rena, for your question. And then with respect to FY22, what we're seeing is an increase of about 18.7 million compared to end of year 21. This is due to anticipated growth in connector care, primarily because we anticipate that the national public health emergency will expire and we will start to see some additional members coming from Mass Health. And it is also attributable, the increase, to assumptions about potentially higher state RAP costs. And these are based on assumptions about rates for 2022 that will be submitted by carriers later this year. So the 18.7 is offset by a $10 million reduction in CCTF funding that supports our administrative costs, which we'll get to on the admin side. But despite the increase, our current recommendation for 22 is significantly less, 26.5 million less than what we previously estimated for fiscal year 21. So I'll stop there for a minute. If there are no further questions on the program budget, I will move to the admin budget. Hearing none. Okay, so from an administrative budget perspective, for fiscal year 21, our net position is unfavorable to what the board approved in July by about 700,000. This is, however, notable because back in October, you may recall that the board approved $5.6 million and contracts with Accenture to support our contact center. Nooper will speak to some additional details, but what we have seen is that a lot of these costs have been offset by other costs that are variable based on membership, such as the PMPM payments that we make to our vendors. And we have also had savings associated with the delay in reopening our walk-in centers as a result of COVID. The fiscal year 21 budget also assumes that for the time being, that the connector will pay in full the 5.6 million as is, and Lewis can speak to this later, but the portion that may be covered by Faneuil, that those discussions will be up and coming.
That's the question I wanted to touch on. Do we have a sense of this, at this point, as to what we may be able to recover from Fenway as a result of their performance or lack thereof?
Not yet, Dimitri. It's not an issue I wanted to get in a fight with them about in the middle of open enrollment, but our regular open enrollment is scheduled to close on Saturday, though in line with what the federal administration may be doing, we're considering a broader extension, but not yet is the short answer.
Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you, Lewis. And then just to wrap up the summary here, for fiscal year 22, our budget recommendation is somewhat favorable. It does result in a net gain. It's a positive net gain of 5.4 million. That does reflect the $10 million reduction in the CCTF funding. It also is reflective of savings from relinquishing the third floor as preferred by the board, And it includes continued investments in our strategic plan activities and other kinds of projects. But there are some significant risks which are not reflected in the current recommendation. And I think the largest of that is a scenario under which we would need to procure for a new contact center vendor. So it does not reflect implementation costs that might be associated with that path. And nor does it reflect any change in ongoing costs, which could be potentially higher with a new vendor. So that's kind of the overview of where we're going. If there are no additional questions, I will pass it over to Edith, and she will speak to fiscal year 21, the programmatic projections. And Edith, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Thank you, Carrie. So the estimate that you will see on the next slide assume an extension of the public health emergency to April 20th. It is possible that they extend it one more time, but the assumption is April 20th at this point. At which time we expect redetermination of Mass Health members to resume, which would result in additional members coming from Mass Health to the Health Connector. And lastly, COVID-19 and any post-election or other ACA impacts will be closely monitored, and enrollment assumption will be updated accordingly. So if we go on slide 5, so as Kara mentioned, net of FFP, FY21 is estimated at 190.9 million, which is 45.2 million lower than the numbers shared at the last ANF subcommittee meeting on June 2nd. This favorable variance is due to lower membership as a result of the multiple extension of the public health emergency period, which keeps people with Mass Health. So usually Connected Care gets more than 3,000 members on average from Mass Health every month. And these members are not coming to CCA since March 2020. But Connected Care members continue to go to Mass Health if they are eligible. So because of the pandemic, the number of CCA enrollees going to Mass Health has been higher than usual. And the other reason, like Carrie mentioned, for the favorable variance is the 2019 CSR reconciliation. So there were savings that were assumed as a result of this change, but actual savings ended up being significantly higher. So there are more details on CSR reconciliation that are included in the appendix if you want to know more. So is there any questions on FY21? If not, I'll turn it over to Nupur.
Slide 6 provides a view of current FY21 enrollment broken out by program type. Relative to the board-approved FY21 enrollment, which is represented by the gray line on the chart, current projections reflect a 6.6% decrease in total member months, largely for the Connected Care program. As Edith mentioned, the primary drivers of this are decreased churn from Mass Health as a result of the COVID emergency, and additionally, we had lower than projected new membership during open enrollment 2021. Are there any questions on FY21 enrollment? All right, I'll move on to slide 7.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, I just had a brief question. I understand the sort of churn is not there. I'm wondering if, given the loss of ESI, if we're seeing that and any real meaningful uptick of enrollees, if that sort of plays into any of this or what we're seeing there.
I'll say the following and then ask Edith or others to weigh in, which is new membership from all sources is significantly down from prior years. The retention rate has been very solid, very healthy compared to prior years. So it's not that we're so much losing an inordinate number of members. It is simply that the usual inflow during open enrollment has not been happening. So that if there's a drop in ESI, it's not ending up here yet. It may be coming to Mass Health, I don't know, but it's not finding its way here.
So moving on to slide 7. FY21 is our first year of experience with our new vendors, Fanuel and Softheon. Following go live in July of 2020, the performance of Fanuel, our contact center vendor, did not meet expectations, and the Health Connector entered into various contracts with Accenture, valued at $5.6 million, to supplement Fanuel's operations. For the purposes of this budget, the entire $5.6 million is reflected as Health Connector liability, although the exact amount to be incurred by the Health Connector and Fanuel will be determined at a future date. If the challenges with Fanuel continue, the Health Connector may consider reprocurement of contact center services. However, please note that at this time, the budget does not reflect any cost associated with reprocurement. On the premium billing side, this is the Health Connector's first year of experience with disaggregated noticing costs, and actual expenditures are being closely monitored to refine the accuracy of those projections. Additional uncertainties also influence the budget, including the impact and duration of the COVID-19 pandemic, which would inform enrollment-driven projections, and the Supreme Court decision and other post-election impacts on the Affordable Care Act, as Edith mentioned. Are there any questions on this slide? All right, hearing none. On slide 8, you will see the estimates we presented at the June 2020 A&F subcommittee meeting, the budget approved by the board in July, and current FY21 estimates. The current FY21 non-GAAP net position, which excludes the GASB 51 adjustments for CXP implementation, is $2 million. This is unfavorable to the board-approved net position by $0.7 million. The primary driver of the $0.7 million unfavorable variance is the $5.6 million investment to support contact center operations, which was offset by enrollment-driven decreases to PMPM costs in the amount of about $3.1 million, the delay of walk-in center ongoing expenses in the amount of about $1.4 million, and savings on final NTT payments at $0.8 million. Additional drivers that inform the variance include the delay of certain HICS noticing and strategic plan investments to FY22, decreased carrier revenues as a result of enrollment, decreased investment income due to lower interest rates, and finally, personnel changes that reflect delays in hiring open positions. Are there any questions on FY21? All right, so thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to Edith to review the FY22 Programmatic Budget recommendation.
So slide 10 speaks to 5 key assumptions underlying the FY22 budget projections. So the first has to do with the expected enrollee contributions and the cost of the state premium wrap. So the state premium wrap covers the difference between the enrollee contributions deemed affordable by the federal government and the ones deemed affordable by the state. So the state are lower. So since the expected enrollee contributions set by the federal government are projected to increase more than the ones set by the state, so it's 3.4% versus 0.9%, based on data currently available, the state premium wrap costs are expected to increase. So please note that the numbers presented on the next slide do not include any assumptions about the economic relief package unveiled by President Biden a week ago. This proposal could reduce the expected enrollee contributions required by the federal. So this means higher APTC and could lead to significant state premium wrap cost savings. Secondly, the FY22 recommendation assumes that CSR loaded rates will continue for calendar year 2022. However, it is not impossible that federal CSR subsidies resume, which would eliminate the need for the load. I think the likelihood of this change is probably less than the likelihood of the change in expected enrollee contribution mentioned previously, but we will continue to monitor. We assume that the premium stabilization will continue for calendar year 2022 with a stepwise approach like what is used in 2021. As a reminder, the stepwise approach gives more generous subsidies for the lowest income enrollees by subsidizing 100% of the difference between the lowest cost and the second lowest cost silver plan, as opposed to only 15% subsidies for the higher income enrollees. This stepwise approach promotes competitiveness. So it's assumed that calendar year 2022 rates between the lowest cost and the second lowest cost plan will be even closer than what we see in calendar year 2021 rates. Please note that the closer rates increase state premium wrap costs. So lastly, we assume no change in carrier participation, and as previously mentioned, significant uncertainty remains on the impact and duration of COVID-19 pandemic, Supreme Court decision, and other potential post-election impacts on the ACA, and recommendation from the Merge Market Advisory Council. So slide 11, where you see the FY22 Health Connector program are estimated at $209.6 million net of FFPs, which is an increase of $18.7 million compared to FY21 projected as of January 2021. So the increase is due to membership growth and state wrap increase, as mentioned earlier, which is also dependent on the 2022 rates, which will not be finalized until late summer 2021. And the Connected Care program cost increase is partially offset by a reduction in CCTF draw for CCA administrative costs, as Carrie mentioned. Are there any additional questions on FY22 programmatic budget recommendations? If not, I'll turn it over to Nooper.
Thank you, Edith. Slide 12 provides a view of current FY22 enrollment.
Nooper, we can't really hear. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. I'll speak louder. Is that better?
Yeah,
Much better.
So slide 12 provides a view of current FY22 enrollment broken out by program type. Relative to current FY21 enrollment, as was shown on slide 6, FY22 reflects a 7.5% increase in total member months. These increases are largely for the Connected Care and unsubsidized programs, although membership across all programs is projected to increase in FY22. Key drivers of this increase are the projected restart of members coming from Mass Health, as indicated earlier, and projected new membership as a result of open enrollment 2022. Are there any questions on FY22 enrollment? All right, hearing none, I'll move on to slide 13. So FY22, as Edith mentioned, reflects a 10 million decrease in the CCTF projection relative to FY21. And it will also be the first year that reflects a full year of depreciation for CXP implementation. In spite of the $10 million decrease, several uncertainties remain that could potentially change the budget picture, including the COVID-19 and post-election impacts mentioned earlier on slide 7. A key point to note here is that FY22 does not reflect any additional investment into call center or premium billing operations, as was required in FY22. It also does not reflect any expenses for a potential reprocurement or contingencies for a more costly contact center vendor. If such interventions are required, The budget picture on the following slide would be expected to change considerably.
So Nooper, if the public health emergency extends beyond April 20th, that would end up being favorable to all of this, or it could go in either direction.
It would be favorable to the programmatic budget, and to a lesser degree, because of PM charges, it would be favorable to the administrative budget as well.
Okay.
Are there any other questions on the slide before I move on?
Hey, Nooper, we've lost you again.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm very soft-spoken. All right, so I'll move on to slide 14. Based on the assumptions detailed on the previous slide, the current FY22 projection reflects a non-GAAP net position of 5.4 million after the 10 million reduction to the CCTF request. The net position is informed by projected enrollment increases, personnel support consistent with the FY21 board approved budget, the end of CXP implementation expenses, and as stated previously, no additional assumptions for customer experience investments as was required in FY21. Are there any questions on the FY22 administrative budget?
So Nooper, just out of curiosity, maybe I'm missing this. So we're not making we don't have a reservation to deal with any perspective of rebidding the contact center. Do we have an idea from a cost perspective what impact that may have on the budget? Should we be forced to go in that direction?
So, Dimitri, there are two scenarios I could imagine with differing impacts. Three, though one is, I think, increasingly less likely. The first scenario, and this is the one that's increasingly less likely, is that we simply come to a new steady state with Faneuil, in which case there are no real anticipated impacts to budget as we emerge from open enrollment and Accenture winds off and Faneuil lives up to its contractual and performance obligations. They've not shown particular aptitude in that direction. So the other two scenarios, one would be a situation where performance deteriorates to such a level that we're really forced into some form of emergency procurement. It would clearly be our aim to undertake such an effort with as close to parity as we can in terms of the call center costs. But I would imagine there would be some updraft in that. And I would be remiss in guessing at what that updraft would be. But I would also be, if I were asked to make a guesstimate at the moment, it would be somewhere on the order of 2 to 5 million annually, which is about the net position we're projecting for 22 at the outside. The third scenario is one where we are not particularly pleased with Faneuil, but we undertake a full bore competitive procurement, which is what we did the last time. Those procurements take on the order of a year. It would probably not be until fiscal 23 that we would see ongoing changes to the call center operations line. There could be, again, something on the order of 2 to 5 million of initial investment in terms of standing up a new vendor. A lot's been happening very fast in the course of open enrollment at the same time that we're juggling COVID and other commitments. So we have negotiations upcoming with Faneuil to address quite a range of issues, including so far a lack of response on their corrective action plan. Certain elements of finance that we both are at odds over. And so I would say that we will know a lot more in the February-March timeframe, likely March. But that's what I can tell you right now.
Thank you.
Concludes our presentation. Are there any additional questions before we close? Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you.
Right.
All
Now,
right.
I think our next agenda item is the personnel review. Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And just to note, the rest of the staff, except for Lewis and Aaron, will leave for this item. And then for item number 4, Lewis will leave for those.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
Did we get a resolution as to what aspects of this is public and what is not?
We have a reading from my esteemed general counsel that the balance of the meeting is still on the public channel. But as a courtesy to our board, the connector staff will not be present for the discussion of personnel and accounting, the accountant's report.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Any questions,
Okay.
please let us
Thank you.
know. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Okay. Just wait a moment for people to.
Louis,
Kathy, I think we should, why not, for the purpose of role taking in this new environment, why not stay with this?
all right, and Drew needs to stay with it because he's controlling the YouTube line.
Okay.
Okay, so just be him and I.
Yeah, so Stacy, if you wouldn't mind dropping. Hi, Stacy. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the personnel review item, I think, is relatively brief this year. Some materials went out this morning. I won't ask that you've deeply read them yet. There's very literally one proposed item within the personnel review. As a matter of board bylaw and administration and finance rules, on an annual basis, we provide a record of senior staff salaries, also a record of how vacation and sick time payouts are handled. The sick time and payout handling has not changed in either 2020 and is certainly not projected to change in 2021. And so the one proposal for the board A&F subcommittee this morning, and this is coming from the executive director, and I respect whatever decision the A&F subcommittee comes to in this regard, is that we consider a 1.4% cost of living adjustment for all staff except for the executive director. The 1.4% cost of living adjustment is pegged. In the past couple of years, I've really used that instead of broad performance enhancements. And instead we've pegged to the prior year's consumer price index, all categories. And it would be my proposal to make this cost of living adjustment for all staff except the director as of effective as of January 1st. As I say, you know, we live in tough times. We're all grateful to be working these days. I want to be well within whatever executive department practice is. And so whatever decision the board subcommittee comes to, we're amenable to, including if that is to delay for further consideration. In addition to that portion of the personnel review, there's a part 2, which is my self-evaluation, which you have, and I am not requesting, I'm not looking towards any salary increase for 2021. So with that having been said, I think I would take my departure unless there are any other questions.
I just have a quick question, Louis. In light of the challenges of the past year, are you as an agency, is there a mechanism to look at those who have performed extremely well during these difficult times where we could recognize them and acknowledge their services and what they have given to the connector during this difficult time? Or is that not in line with what other agencies are doing?
Dimitri, and here also I'm happy to take guidance. I'm extraordinarily old school in the following regard. You know, some of us have essentially carried 2 jobs over the course of this past year. It has been a very hard year. But unless there's an actual change in scope in the job position, I just find that performance-based increases tend to be applied broadly and at higher percentage increases than COLAs. And those performance-based increases applied broadly and at higher percentages over time really take our personnel line to a growth of higher than inflation, which is difficult for a quasi-public organization. Now, we will recognize people who rise in seniority, say to senior director levels, but otherwise the COLA is the principal mechanism for keeping people in pace with inflation and saying, thank you for the job well done, and here's our existing salary. I say that jokingly, but that's the position we've taken the last couple of years. But I in this as in other things, I'm very open to guidance from the board.
Thank you, Louis.
So Louis, were there any, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Just a couple quick clarifications. This would be for calendar year 2021, is that right?
Yes, but the annualized is given there. The 115 is a full year figure. So half that for fiscal 21. And it is already incorporated. We do include in the budgetary assumptions some accommodation for a COLA, so it does not change the proposed administrative budget figures that are in front of you.
Great, thank you.
So was there, Louis, was there any sort of financial bonuses given to the team that was responsible for the go live of the new systems and everything back in the summer?
No, there was not.
Okay. And this 1.4% would be just a flat, everyone would get it, it wouldn't.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And I know Aaron is taking notes from the meeting, so we'll find out outcomes, and with deep appreciation.
Thanks, Louis.
Take care all.
Okay, so I know Lewis is extremely humbled, and he's not going to be one to ask for anything. But having been on this board for several years, and it's always the same routine every year where he says, give to my team, but don't give me anything. I think whatever we do, I want to make sure that he's not excluded. The connector has seen a lot of challenges, and Lewis has been a guiding light in terms of providing the direction to ensure that the connector continues to function in a way that allowing the agency to provide the services that's needed to the community. I know when the first week I joined, excuse the French, but it was a complete rat show. And there have been a lot of work done to bring this agency in line and to ensure that we're providing the services to the public that it deserves. So whatever we do, I want to make sure that we don't take Lewis at his word and exclude him from the COLA, and that he's included in that. So hopefully I have everyone's support with regard to that point.
I totally agree. Totally agree. I just, I'm struggling with the 1.4%. It just, I mean, I used to, back in the day, I used to have to, deliver 3% increases, and I felt terrible doing that because it just felt woefully inadequate. But it is what it is. And his point about not having that line inflate at a rate that is, higher than CPI. I get it. I totally get it. And I can't dispute that. Lauren, do you know what other agencies are doing?
So I actually don't. Cassandra might, I don't mean to punt to you or put you on the spot, but usually there's, if I'm remembering correctly, like a bell curve where it's it is a little bit based on performance, but each agency is sort of given a certain percentage. So like the top percentage gets like I don't know if these percentages are correct, but like a 2% increase. And then like the middle tier gets like a 1.5, and then another subset get like 1%. It's tiered like that, but Cassandra, you may be able to speak more to this.
I don't know any more than that. I would ask Olivia Graham if you are still with us. She's one of our A&F assistant budget directors, and she probably has a better handle on what we're doing right now in terms of COLAs. Olivia, are you still on the call?
I am. Hi, Cassandra. Thank you. So I'm not entirely how it relates to performance and what each agency, how they handle that individually. I'm not sure. I think it does depend on the agency and how they choose to use their resources. In terms of COLAs, again, I think it depends on the agency and how they've budgeted. Thank you.
So is the 1.4% in line on average in line with what other agencies across the state are doing, or are they going a little bit higher, a little bit lower?
So again, I think it depends on the agency. So I'm not sure across the board.
Okay.
But I think generally the agencies don't sort of deviate much from each other. So I will say, like, at a very, very macro level, 1.4 is sort of generally consistent, but I think that some agencies use a more like nuanced approach where they have a certain allocation that, like, for the top performers, and they get a little bit more than the base. But I can say that 1.4 is not sort of off base to prior increases that I've seen.
And I know that Lewis wants to make sure that everything is level, that everyone in the agency gets 1.4, 1.5, whatever that number is. My concern is, what are we doing with regard to the agency to show to those that have gone far and beyond their baseline responsibility during this crazy time that we are living in, to show them a better appreciation. I know that we are talking a quasi-public agency, and it's not like we can run out and give everyone the raise that they deserve, but I want to see what it is that we can do to really tell people this has been a challenging year and you've done an exceptional job. with what you've had. And this is how we as leadership for the agency is showing our appreciation to you.
So, oh, go ahead, Lauren.
I was just going to say that I completely sort of appreciate and don't disagree with the sentiment that they had a lot of sort of hurdles to overcome this year, and that there needs to be a way to sort of show that appreciation. I would say that across state government, there's been, this is obvious, I don't need to say, been a very taxing year with people working 7 days a week, 18, 20-hour days. And there's not going to be an opportunity to sort of show the appreciation for that in a monetary sense. I mean, there are sort of performance recognition programs where they get citations that the state offers as a way to recognize sort of outstanding performance, but I think it would be a little bit challenging for one, quasi-state agency to offer monetary sort of increases or bonuses for the added work that they had this year without doing that sort of more across the board or even with other quasi agencies. I mean, I can think of 2 other quasi-state agencies where there's a lot of the even leadership staff sort of doing a lot of work and support for the state's command center, essentially wearing 2 hats. And I know that neither of those quasi agencies are sort of providing a financial sort of bonus or incentive in their pay. Yeah. So just throwing that out there for consideration. But again, completely appreciate and understand the sentiment.
Yeah.
I would just second what Lauren said. I had the same thought essentially, which is just to say that these heroic efforts are reflected throughout the Commonwealth workforce, and it's great to think of ways to recognize them, but it's a challenge in some respects to compare the connector to the other quasis as well as other state agencies. So it's a difficult situation.
Yeah, yeah. I think our hands are somewhat tied, not only because of equity across government and all of the different agencies, but also if we make decisions to bump up the amount of money that he's recommending, it then puts a burden on him to have to find how to pay for that through his budget. And so it's a gift that ends up being a burden instead of assistance. So I wonder if what we could do is, number one, approve his recommendation, amend it so that it includes him as well as the whole staff. And perhaps we figure out a way as a board to do some sort of recognition for all of them. I don't know if it ends up being something in person, God willing, at some point when we can do that or something. I don't know. I'm not in a creative mindset right now.
I definitely support that view.
I think that's a really good idea. And I can check to see if maybe there's some sort of like citation or something, and maybe we can work with Lewis on this just to figure out who he feels like had really sort of stepped up. I mean, I know everybody stepped up, but particularly the folks that had to deal with the procurement and the transition of the call centers. And so why don't I'll ask around to see if there's any sort of precedent that we could borrow from. And then I think we should work with Lewis to think through, how he may want to do that. But sort of also recognizing that I'm sure everybody on the staff sort of stepped up and exceeded, their work in some capacity this year.
Yeah, I would like to see, and I'm sure we say this every year, but I really would like to see if we had a bigger pool to work with to see some sort of stratification so that he's able to give a little bit more to his higher performers and maybe a little bit less to his lower performers. But I don't think with a 1.4% pool, I just don't think there's enough wiggle room there, because then you're talking about basically giving people zero, and I don't think he wants to do that.
Now, we had talked about stratifying that process either last year or the year prior, and I don't think we had gotten much traction on that. So I don't know if there was a reason why that didn't go very far, but certainly from my perspective, I think it would serve us well to maybe research that a little bit and see if that's something that's doable. So moving forward, we may have additional instruments, if you would, in terms of addressing the top performers at the agency.
Exactly. So let's make sure, Erin, I think you're the one who's taking the minutes. Can we make sure that the minutes reflect that we would like to have a discussion with Louis about for next year, making sure that we've got a system in place to be able to stratify employee raises?
Absolutely.
So
Thank you.
I just so folks know, I phoned a friend about what we're doing this year. I'm getting clarification about whether it's calendar year 21 or fiscal year 21, probably latter, probably fiscal year 21. But it looks like there's a good chance that this year we may not do any types of increases for state agency managers. Only union employees through their collective bargaining agreements will get their steps. So I don't think that changes this I don't think that should change this recommendation. I think obviously Connector is a quasi agency, and they're not, the Commonwealth is facing sort of unprecedented fiscal challenges right now. And so I think that this is likely the one of the net results of that. But wanted to share, but again, I don't think that it necessarily should change the recommendation.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so I believe what we've agreed to is we will accept the 1.4% COLA increase for all employees, including Louis. Lauren, you were going to do a little bit of research and maybe talk to the secretary about a way that we can recognize the team through some sort of, kind of state-based approved mechanism. And we will work with Louis to, in advance of this meeting next year, have some sort of stratification, or at least he have in his mind a stratification of how he can distribute the dollars a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
That's right. And if I would welcome others' thoughts on the citation. I mean, I can't think of anything off the top of my head of precedent. So if you have sort of creative ideas on how we could recognize, I'd welcome.
Okay. All right, Brock, I think we left you with like 5 minutes.
That's quite all right. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a sound check, thumbs up if I'm coming through. Great, thank you. So we will endeavor to do this in an expedited fashion. So just for the record, my name's Brock Romano. I'm the audit partner for the Connector. Joining me is Karen Farrell, who is the audit manager for the Connector. We do have a handout, but I think I could speak to the key provisions there, and as we try to expedite this discussion. I think the highlights that we wanted to communicate to the Connector this afternoon is one, our audit opinion. It's unqualified, unmodified is the technical term we use today, but I think the conventional language of unmodified, clean opinion is what has been provided by KPMG back in October. I understand that the financial statements have been disseminated and previously discussed with the committee, so we won't do that today unless the committee has any particular comments. I will say that as part of doing an audit in accordance with professional standards that also include government auditing standards, we also issue a report on internal controls over financial reporting. And just a slight distinction between this report and what our public companies, those are our SEC registrants do. SEC registrants actually get an opinion on internal controls. When we do an audit in accordance with government auditing standards, we produce a report. The distinction there is quite dramatic in terms of level of effort, but we didn't notice any, didn't report any items in that report relative to internal control over financial reporting that would be significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. So a fairly clean report as well on our report on internal controls. Karen, I'm going to steal a little bit of your thunder because I think we're a little pressed for time here. But,
That's okay.
If we kind of think of the financial statements, we follow the money, right? So if you think about your assets heavily in cash, heavily in fixed assets, large receivables, and then on your operating statement, your P&L operating activity, that's where the majority of our audit focus is, using audit techniques like sampling, statistical sampling, specific identification. We will focus heavily on areas that we think involve judgment. Judgment in the case of the connector, probably where there's the most judgment would be on allowance for doubtful accounts. I think you're blessed in that your receivables typically are collectible, especially your receivables from state agencies. And then of course, there's assumptions embedded in some of the projections of your post-employment benefit obligation, and we use an outside specialist to help us with that. I am going to share my screen just for a minute if I can actually do this. So let me know if the screen is coming through.
There it goes.
It is. So this is our prepared remarks. It's on file with you folks. So in the interest of time, I'm going to expedite this a little bit. Karen, I apologize. I'm stealing a little bit of your thunder here. But I do want to make sure that we cover what we call our required communications.
Mm-hmm.
These are the professional standard required communications when we meet with a governing body, and we view the subcommittee as that. I think the optimal word, we have a pretty good visual graph here. I think the optimal word is no, right? Meaning that we have no matters to report. We got great cooperation. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, during this unusual audit season, we got great cooperation from the connector. Many of our clients struggled to meet deadlines. The connector, especially through leadership of Carrie and her team, really had a good game plan, and for the most part, we met the historical milestones that we've always had. Karen, any observations you want to share with the committee about the audit?
Yeah, I did just want to commend them like you did as well, just in this, remote environment, and with, they have many different priorities ongoing. It was, terrific that they were able to complete the audit timely. I will just mention on this slide that Brock pulled up that we did not identify any audit differences that remained uncorrected at the end of the audit, or that we required them to correct during the audit. So that is good news. And Brock also mentioned that there were no control deficiencies. We have here a performance improvement, which is more just like a recommendation. And we're recommending that the connector require Softion to provide them with a SOC 1 Type 2 report, which essentially is a review by an independent, review of Softion's processes and controls as they relate to the connector's business. And this will give the connector a good sense of what control deficiencies Softion may have around, their business with the connector.
And were there any, that makes perfect sense. Were there any concerns? Did Carrie have any concerns about that, number one? And have they already started talking to Softion about their ability to produce this?
Yes, I believe they have started talking to Softion about their ability to produce it. Typically it may take one cycle to be able to get that report.
Mhm.
As of our audit for June 30th, before, this is really prior to the implementation of Softion Go Live. So, there were none that, I recollect, specifically with that. Maybe now, I think.
Were there any recommendation for perhaps similar reports from Feniel or any other partner?
I think it's always good. Oh, go ahead, Brock.
No, go ahead, Karen. I think, Dimitri, we've been kind of on record with the previous vendor NTT about, the need for a SOC report. So the connector kind of took heed of that and actually required it as part of the Softion contract. I was looking at that contract just before this meeting, and it's just a matter of time before they produce it, and they're contractually obligated to do it. I don't know whether the same contractual obligation exists for Faniel, although the nature of the services might be slightly different, where Softion services directly intersect with financial reporting, where Faniel may be more member management, which may be certainly has a huge operational impact, but isn't necessarily the processing and recording of transactions.
Yeah.
But that's a good point, and we'll try to follow up on that.
Okay.
So I know we're going over, but I'm going to try and wrap this up really quickly, and wouldn't have an audit meeting without telling you the prolific nature of the regulators, in our case, the rulemaking bodies. There's a list of future accounting pronouncements. We all got relief this year because of the pandemic. The regulators saw fit to delay any standards that would otherwise have been effective this year. I think if I were the standards on this list that I would point out to the connector, I think involve the leases. That seems to get a lot of headline discussion with a lot of our clients. The good news is the connector doesn't have a ton of leases, but the other standard that's kind of right on the heels of that is on the bottom of the page here, GASB 96 on subscription-based technology arrangements. It's kind of piggybacked off of the lease concept. So if you think of your contract with Softion and or potential Faniel, where you're kind of a software as a solution or a platform as a service, those standards kind of speak to those. So we'll be working with management to make sure that they're thinking of those standards well in advance of implementation.
Okay.
So with that, we kind of did a little bit of an expedited presentation, but wanted to kind of leave time for questions and allow time for the rest of your daily activities. So with that, that'll conclude the Faniel formal remarks from us.
Thank you. Does anyone have any further questions?
None from me.
Okay. And there aren't very many of us left here, so so I think this is great. Thank you. As I said to Carrie, I know people take this for granted, but you can't take this stuff for granted. You gotta, it's important, and we very much appreciate the great results very much. All right. If we have no other agenda topics, I suggest we call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second it. All right.
I'm still here.
Kathy, I see. It's like I see you. It looks like it's just Cassandra, Dimitri, and I. So I think we can all collectively say aye at the same time, and
Okay.
And call it a day.
Are you sure you don't want to do a roll call, Mina?
We could. I think it'd actually be more fun to see if we could synchronize. But you never know. But Kathy, is that okay with you?
Works for me.
Okay, everyone ready? 1, 2, 3.
Aye.
All right.
Please
Thank you, everyone.
stay safe and healthy.
Okay,
See you
thank
next
you.
month.
Thank you,
Bye.
Rena. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.